Hi, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the Banking and Finance Conclave of Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Some time back, an article was written by Kishore Mahbubani, who is a diplomat from Singapore. And generally, he has been bullish China for decades. And he gave a lecture at President KR Memorial Lecture where he made a statement that India can be bigger than China. He gave a very small comparison that Indians in America earn per capita income of about $55,000. If Indians in India were earning similar income, Indian GDP should be about $71 trillion. And against that, we are roughly around $3 trillion. Kishore felt that India is one country where the performance and potential are having the vast difference. He gave an example in a metamorphical basis that Indians are like caged tigers. The only thing restricting them is Indian ecosystem. When they go out in America, Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, or any other part of the world, they are able to thrive and grow and survive in that ecosystem. But in India, they are caged, they are controlled, they are restricted by our ecosystem. In Professor Kishore's view, Indians are tigers roaming in the jungle and outside India. In India, they are caged tigers, and which is why there is such a vast difference between the performance and the potential. In my opinion, obviously, what Kishore has mentioned is absolutely correct, but there is one big problem which he has overlooked. The problem is misallocation of savings by Indians. In last 20 years, we have imported about $373 billion of gold. This is net of jewelry exports. This does not include gold smuggling. This does not include gold jewelry which comes in with travelers returning from abroad and walking through Green Channel. If we add gold smuggling and gold returning through travelers, probably Indians have spent about $500 billion in import of gold in just last 20 odd years. This savings is resulting into misallocation as our money goes abroad for buying of gold. The imported gold does not create much value in Indian ecosystem. It deprives our entrepreneurs from equity, from debt, and from financing. This $500 billion of savings allocated into financial product would have created materially larger and bigger and stronger economy. Why are people trusting gold when they know that this is not necessarily the most productive investment? Many women go and do monthly investment with roadside jewelers. And when Goodwin jewelers become bankrupt, they all lose money. Many investors buy gold in 1 gram, 5 gram, 10 gram denomination without realizing that they are paying 20 and 30 and 40% premium for buying gold in a smaller lot. We are the largest owner of gold in the world, and our prices might be supporting the gold prices. Clearly, if our savings would not have gone to gold, but gone to financial products like bank deposits, insurance policies, mutual fund units, we would have funded our entrepreneurs, we would have retained equity ownership in our hands, and we would have created bigger economy. The same challenge is witnessed in collective investment schemes. Every day we hear that one or another collective investment schemes have gone down, robbing investors of millions of rupees. In last 20 years, about 100,000 crore worth of collective investment schemes have gone down, right from PSCL to Sarada to other CIS schemes. This allocation also is misallocation. This savings does not create productive assets in the economy, and many of them might be siphoned off abroad. Clearly, there is a need to retain India's savings in Indian financial product. And one of the reasons why that is not happening is that buying of collective investment schemes, buying of gold, is far more efficient and far more user-friendly than buying of financial products. Over the years, regulators have made ease of doing investments. They have introduced KYC norms. They have pushed digital applications. And yet, buying of gold, buying of collective investment schemes, and now even buying of crypto is becoming more simpler, more efficient than buying of financial products. In today's conclave, we have focused upon how to create frictionless servicing to customers, how to expand financial markets so that we can retain India's savings in India and help create $5 trillion economy. I'm sure all of you are going to enjoy rich discussion with carefully created panels, and you'll have a fruitful evening. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, we are having some technical difficulties, but thank you all for joining us today. Distinguished panelists, moderators, past presidents, members of the Bombay Chamber Board, distinguished guests, attendees, and everyone who's involved in this very important conclave. As Nilesh mentioned, it is such an important topic for the current times. I would like to extend a warm welcome to each one of you at the first day of the BFSI, Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Conclave of the Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which, as many of you would know, is among the oldest operating chambers of commerce in India. At the outset, I want to thank our speakers for kindly accepting our invitation and gracing this event for addressing our members on an important topic. I think the financial services industry is going through a very significant period of innovation, disruption, and change. It is very much the heart, blood, and the lubricant that keeps our economy moving. So over today and tomorrow, we are going to hear from many speakers, all of whom experts in their fields. They are leaders, stalwarts, entrepreneurs with many years of experience, and some of them absolute disruptors to the old way of doing things. And I hope we are all able to come out of this with some insight and a view as to what today's present and tomorrow's future looks like. My special thanks to Nilesh Shah, my colleague on the board. He's Senior Vice President of Bombay Chamber of Commerce and Chair of the Banking, Finance and Capital Markets Committee. Ashit Kampani, Chair, Private Equity and Venture Capital Committee. Sandeep Khosla, Director General of Bombay Chamber of Commerce, and the entire Secretariat and committee workers for their relentless efforts, and to all of you who have joined today to make this event a big success. I could go into sharing a little bit more about the chamber. Very briefly, I will do so, and then we will move into the first panel discussion of the day. As I mentioned, that the chamber, established in 1836, is a 185-year-old body, has a long, illustrious history of continuous support to trade and industry. We represent a wide spectrum of highly reputed, professionally run companies which are based in the city of Mumbai, which, as we all know, is the commercial capital of India, but whose manufacturing service footprints extend across the country. The chamber acts as a bridge between civil society, government, and its member organizations and aims to promote the interests of all these stakeholders in the overall interest of the country. We have hosted, as part of our AGM and foundation days, in many illustrious national leaders of government as well as from industry. We had our 185th AGM just yesterday, and the four pillars that the chamber has laid out, again, going into the future, and you will hear this from us repeatedly as we go through the conclave today and tomorrow, is there is the past, there is the present, and the future, and we are all looking towards the future. Chamber is very focused on looking at four issues. One is, how do we create sustainable models of growth that are not only creating economic progress, but also in a way that is sustainable from the environment and social inclusiveness point of view. Second is the digital frontiers. Third is inclusive and diverse set of thought processes, and both in boardrooms as well as businesses. And finally, and very importantly, is supporting the ease of doing business agenda of the government. On that note, I will turn to the panel. Our first panel today, which I have the honor of moderating, is on frictionless service and delightful experience to customers. We are all customers of financial services. And I have the unique pleasure of inviting here the fellow panel members. Nilesh Shah, as I mentioned earlier, Senior Vice President, Chair, Banking, Finance, Capital Markets Committee, as well as Group President and Managing Director for Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company Limited. Nilesh, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, Vikram Khaitan from Bank of America Merrill Securities India Limited. I will not go into long bio introductions. All of these are absolutely well-known stalwarts, so we will not. I don't think they need introduction really. Rajiv Sabharwal, Managing Director of Tata Capital. Rajiv Anand, who is member Banking, Finance and Capital Markets Committee of the Bombay Chamber and Executive Director of Axis Bank. Can we please bring our panelists on stage?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, Rajiv, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hi, Nilesh. Hi, Anjali.
Hi.
Hello, Rajiv, welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Vikram.
Hi.
Okay, we will give Rajiv Anand a minute. But let me start with some broad context setting. Given that we have the opportunity to hear from all of you, and you represent very large institutions, you've had many, many years of seeing financial services in India and globally actually grow as an industry. Let me start with a very broad brush question, and I will request each of you to share your observations for 3-4 minutes, as long as you need. What are the biggest trends that you are currently seeing in the BFSI sector? What are the associated opportunities and threats that these trends mean for each of your businesses? Vikram, if I may start with you, please.
Sure. So the way I see this, I think the biggest trend I see is banks and NBFCs, I think, are differentiating themselves via partnership with fintech. I think pre-COVID, there was always a question if they would coexist or there'll be a tug of war, because and it is it's partly true also that banks always focused on product and not on experience. It's only in the last, rather post-COVID, that they have realized that customers today want more of experience like an Amazon, Zomato, or a Swiggy experience when it comes to financial services. So I think that's the broad theme that I see. However, I would also say that COVID appears to have pushed banks and NBFCs to coexist, because each of them actually feed into their each other's strength. I think some of the key areas where I think I see banks and NBFCs collaborating is lending, payments, neo banking, and customer experience. And I'll allude a little bit more on the customer experience, but basically, if I just have to look at lending, I think banks always wanted to have a wider net, but I think the partnership with fintechs is helping them to source small ticket loans and just to build up new products like buy now pay later, which actually in India probably was or is at a very nascent stage. But if you look at globally, including US, Australia, buy now pay later is a very big market. And not just that, another trend that we are seeing in India is when it comes to lending, banks are partnering with fintechs when it comes to gold loans too. Moving, if I have to look on on the payment side, I would say banks are perpetually trying to catch up because the way the fintechs have mushroomed in India and the way they are giving the experience to the customers, banks want to partner with as many fintechs as possible because that's the way they'll be able to grab more customers. I think three key areas where partnership exists maybe would be UPI, e-commerce, and cross-border remittances. But finally, coming to the most important point, I would say, is the customer experience. And as I was alluding earlier, I think it's now high time that banks are realizing that with this new generation, new age tech, every customer wants to have an experience like they have when they are shopping on Amazon or when they are ordering food on Swiggy or Zomato, and that's the kind of experience that the customers want. Now, there can be always a debate whether who owns the customer, whether it's a bank or a fintech who owns it. But at the end of the day, this is something that has to change, and banks have to realize that they need to give a frictionless experience to customers over the next 2 to 3 years, and that's going to be the most changing trend that I see.
Thank you, Vikram. I'll pick up on some of these points as we move along in the discussion. Rajiv, if I may turn to you.
Sure.
I think biggest focus for everyone has been to present a much better digital front end and digitize everything at the back end. I think that's the biggest change which we are seeing. I remember this channel, the digital channel was largely focused on servicing customers till about a couple of years back, and that's changed. For example, we are seeing in certain products, digital channel is actually contributing close to about 20% of our increment business. This has never happened before, and I'm not talking about just own customers. I'm talking about including customers. So it's becoming a much larger channel. So everybody is focusing on that. The other thing which we are seeing, and very similar to what Vikram said, in terms of partnerships. Partnerships are growing. I think everybody is looking at what can provide a better customer experience, or what can help you make a better decision as far as credit is concerned, or how can you cross-sell more. I think various partnerships have emerged, and these partnerships don't seem to be only for acquiring business, but we are seeing this emerging for collections, for example, for servicing customers and so on. So, the system is integrating far more than it was integrating before. The third is, I think, no situation is a normal situation. Disruption is happening every day. And you are seeing new players emerge where they're trying to completely disrupt the existing model. So, everybody has to be far more agile. And I don't know whether this will lead to a situation where most of the technology will get in-housed or most of it will get outsourced. I don't know at the moment because there are pluses and minuses. While everybody has moved to cloud, that's a separate thing. But in terms of development, I believe companies may start focusing on having much larger teams inside the organization. And this is happening not only because of changes, but also because of scarcity of talent, which has suddenly become very, very critical, and more so, post pandemic striking the industry. These are some of the things I would say, and maybe we'll discuss more of these as we hear from others and more to our mind.
Absolutely, Rajiv. This disruption, innovation, two sides of the same coin. And similarly, what is a threat today can actually be turned into an opportunity. So we will come back to a lot of these themes that we have picked up already. Nilesh, if I may turn to you.
So there is actually just one thing happening in financial market. The free lunches are disappearing and returns are coming only to the guys who are willing to take the risk. The bankers are realizing that 9 to 4 banking with golf is gone. because AAA rated clients are borrowing at a rate cheaper than bank, and peer-to-peer lending is going to impact retail loans. The brokerage guys are realizing that digital broking is available at virtually free of cost, and it is your servicing which is going to give you the clientele. In wealth management, distribution is shifting to advisory. You get return proportionate to the value add to the customer. In mutual fund, there is a differentiation between alpha generating funds versus non-alpha generating funds, and expense ratios are coming down in order to become competitive. Passive versus active debate is lingering on. Essentially, in any part of financial services now, there are very few islands left where there is free lunch available. Everywhere else, disruption or innovation has ensured that you have to take risk to generate return. You have to add value to collect fees from the clientele.
Thank you,
And,
Nilesh. As always, you have left us with a very sharp observation. Free lunches are disappearing, which can only mean good things for the customer, I would think, right? Gentlemen?
yeah, one more point I just add to what I am seeing is because of the let me say how customers have adopted digital channels. What we are seeing is that the pace at which a new product scales up is much faster today than it would have happened before. Like look at buy now pay later. I'm just saying, could you have imagined a new product becoming of this size so soon and so quickly? Uh, you know, and there are other examples of this also. So the pace at which they are growing in size has dramatically, the pace has increased. And for certain products, I don't know whether it's right or wrong, because we know at least in the banking industry that the true value of that portfolio, you come to know only 1 year or 2 years down the line. So some of these things, the jury is out how they will perform. Some of them will survive and grow, and some of them may die off. But the pace at which you can scale up today is far, far better than what you could have done.
So, in some ways, it's, the true test of lending is when the money comes back. Giving money away is the easier part. So, we'll come back to fintechs versus NBFCs and lenders a little bit later in the discussion. I want to pick up on something Vikram mentioned. The customer wants an Amazon-like experience even for financial services, which means customer expectation is high. Customer is digitally facile, knows what good looks like, and is not afraid and quite willing, really, to switch providers. So that whole old notion of loyalty and the relationship, that seems to be a little bit under threat. So twofold question here for all of you, and let's keep it interactive. Please feel free to sort of comment and take the discussion in whichever direction. How are you, as large companies, coping with this sudden dramatic new trend towards digitalization? As Rajiv mentioned, it seems to be accelerating. The pace of acceleration is also positive. So it's an increasing level. So the pace is also increasing all the time. So change is happening much faster. How are your businesses adapting to adopt this digitalization wave? One. And are you seeing yourselves as a disruptor, enabler, or a reluctant sort of follower? And not you as leaders, but you, your businesses, your teams, your organization. And finally, as you kind of find yourselves on this train or sprinting towards this new sort of digital frontier, how do you capture this new demanding digital customer without alienating the core part of the customer franchise, who may still want a personal connection and who may not quite be so far down on their digital journey?
So if I can take a shot at it,
Yes.
I'm sure all of you have seen a movie called Mask of Zorro, Antonio Banderas. In one iconic scene, he's riding on both the horses together. So we are, in some sense, Zorro, which is trying to keep one leg on digital and one leg on physical. I cater to clientele who are 80 years old to probably 20 years old. There is a segment, and not necessarily 80-year-old is digitally unsavvy and 20-year-old is digitally savvy. The digital savviness has nothing to do with age. So I have to cater customers who want physical touch. I have to cater customers who want digital touch. And I have to balance between both. Uh, there was a WhatsApp forward which said that who is the best CTO for your company? Is it your CTO or is it COVID-19? So COVID-19 actually accelerated our digitization journey. From being physical and digital, overnight we became pure digital. It created its own sets of pressure, but finally we have been able to create the right balance between physical and digital journey. I'm sure the world will move towards digital in the days to come, and we'll have to keep on reinventing ways of managing digital ecosystem. But at the same time, we'll have to still maintain for some time balance between physical and digital. We also now have Rajiv Anand. Welcome, Rajiv.
Rajiv, you're on mute.
Rajiv, you're on mute.
I mean, this is another new phrase that we've all become very familiar with over the last 15 months. Not yet, Rajiv. Okay, we give Rajiv a minute till we sort out the technology at the back end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Nilesh, I was just saying that we're talking about physical and digital, and here I've been struggling with technology for the last 15 minutes. Therefore, just shows you, yes, technology is an enabler, but without some help from friends on WhatsApp physically, I wouldn't have been on stage at this point in time. So my apologies for being late on stage, but it's an interesting segue to the conversation, isn't it?
Indeed. So we are discussing the following two things. What are the biggest trends that you see currently in the BFSI sector? And what are the associated opportunities and threats? And we went around the table, and I think what came out clearly was the customer is demanding, customer is digital, wants an Amazon-like experience. It was pointed out that there are no more free lunches. You have to work much harder to get business, to capture margins, and to continue to differentiate. Speed and scale. So speed of scale up is much faster. So you have a lot less time to react. So some of these things were said, and then we went into talking about how are you as a business and as a business leader. So less as a business leader, but how are your businesses, organizations, people really coping with this need to adopt the digitalization wave and carry both segments of your customer base. The new customers who are perhaps more digitally savvy, the point was made that they're not necessarily, it's not that older people are less savvy and younger people are more, but just the more digitally facile with the less digitally facile. So getting the new without losing the old customers. So that's where we are. So if you can comment on some of this, and then we'll just integrate the conversation and move forward.
Thank you, Anjali. We as well, and people used to take to do bank called update.
The voice is still a challenge, Rajiv. I can't hear clearly.
Same here.
Same
Can you
here.
hear me
Might
now?
be yes, we
Yeah,
can.
it's better.
Okay, so maybe I should just stop. So I was saying my father used to be a banker, and in the old days, people used to take 1 day's leave to do what was called bank work, update your passbook, get a new checkbook, etc. To we're in a world where you're able to seamlessly pay on Swiggy or or make P2P payments on a Sunday evening, for pretty much any amount. So therefore, we are in an environment where the customer, like you rightly said, wants to do everything here and now, anytime, any place, at a place of his choice, at a time of his choice, and I think really it's a question of survival. If you as a financial institution are not able to provide those services, I think you're pretty much doomed. So I think it's fair to say that over the last 5-7 years, technology has evolved significantly. Bankers have learned new things around UI UX, not something that comes very naturally to bankers, but bankers have learned how to design their apps in a human centric design to make it much simpler, intuitive, learning from customers. And I think and I must admit that banks in general have done a pretty good job, particularly on the retail side. I mean, our own mobile app today has in excess of 250 services which is available, and there is really no reason for you to go to the bank anymore, to the branch anymore, to do most things, unless of course you're taking a home loan, in which case we still need physical documents, etc., etc. But in context, I think it still is important to have a physical presence, because ultimately we are in the business of trust. And I think the customer certainly wants to see, may not necessarily be in the metros, but as you go deeper into the country, wants to see that physical presence, wants to have that comfort that if something goes wrong, there is an Axis Bank branch which is very close to me, and I can always go there and solve my issues, which could perhaps have come through on the digital side. So uh, I don't. I have been reading about the death of branch banking now for over a decade. I really don't think that we are anywhere close to that anytime soon. Yes, maybe we need less branches, smaller branches, less number of people, but I would certainly not write the obituary of branch banking too soon.
That's a very interesting point. So you have to carry with you the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of bank branches, locations, the costs, and yet at the same time invest pretty heavily today in technology. And at a time when the war for talent, for good technology talent, has never been fiercer. I think today large enterprises, whether it is in BFSI or otherwise, are competing not with each other for the best tech talent, but actually with the startups. And we spoke about this a little bit earlier. Rajiv, you mentioned that will technology come in-house if it is core? I've heard somebody say that banking actually is finance layered onto technology. So at the core of it is actually technology. So does technology then come in-house, and can banks, or banks, all BFSI banks, NBFCs, insurance companies, mutual funds, and so on, can you really invest in that kind of technology and talent and compete with the startups? Or is there a different model where there is a partnership and there is a buy versus a build? So how do you think about it for your own business models?
So the narrative a few years ago was, that fintechs would have banks for lunch or breakfast, as the case may be. Uh, but I think for a period of time, the narrative has evolved into a more collaborative model. The fintechs obviously have the technology, but the banks have the customer base. And really, how do we marry the two such that it's a win-win situation on both sides? And really, that's what has evolved over the last few years. I mean, we, for example, we work with a whole bunch of startups. At one end, we provide the pipes to Amazon Pay and Google Pay and WhatsApp, etc. But on the other side, we have a whole bunch of startups or technology players that we are partnering with to be able to bring that technology to solve customer problems. So I think it's a more collaborative approach that has evolved over a period of time, and I think that's healthy on both sides.
And just to add to that, maybe I was just going through yesterday. I mean, going through the list of the top 5 banks in India and their fintech partnership, and I was actually surprised to see almost all the 7 to 8 large banks, the largest banks in India, they have over 20 fintech partnerships, right from some HDFC putting in money into small case, or HDFC getting Zeta onto their platform, or SBI going for cash free. I mean, it's like every aspect of fintech. Banks in India, I've seen the banks have some form of tie-up with the fintech. And I was actually surprised. I thought there will be 2 or 3 partnerships, but all the banks had over 20 partnerships, including some large investments.
No, I think it's so important for us. We actually, I mean, and I'm sure it's the same in like rightly said, in many of the other large banks as well, that we actually have partnership teams which are only focused on partnerships, and therefore you are looking at the entire startup community to be able to do hackathons, be able to pick some of the best and brightest here to be able to solve for solutions, and it comes both ways. I mean, we have a
Right.
problem, a solution, or there is a solution, and we are seeing how best we can use it to help our customers.
Rajiv?
Yeah.
Sabra?
So there are both sides of the coin, and some points, at some point you Anjali referred to losing tech people to fintechs. We're also losing business people to fintechs because the way their ESOPs are listing and the way they can be awarded, we are losing even business people too. So some of those challenges are unique. But some of the other points, like what Rajiv mentioned, banks will have customers and fintechs will have technology. I feel there are enough fintechs who have now more customers than some of the banks. So to assume that fintechs will only have technology and not customers is I wonder whether that will be true. These are all questions I'm saying because I'm feeling that is changing. This whole concept of neobank also, which is emerging, where you will have probably all services except for a banking license, could really disrupt some of the existing things. Today, we talk about one fintech collaborating with a bank, but if there are 2 fintechs, one which has customers and one which has technology, why won't they collaborate with each other? So some of these things will also happen. I don't think so. There will be an option for banks also to be like fintech. While they can collaborate, but I don't think so there will be an option on creating something on the front end or at the back end, which is as good on technology as the others can generate. I don't think so. See, one of the reasons why we have not seen a plain open space is because it's a regulated industry. If who knows tomorrow if there are 5 fintechs which are given banking licenses and how that will transform the industry. So these are some things which can change, and in a regulated industry with a change in regulation, some of these things can change very quickly. So we need to. I don't think so today. And I to that extent, I agree with what Nilesh mentioned. There are no free lunches. While partnerships will be key and they will be important, but to think that these all partnerships will last and we will always have a win-win thing in it may not always be true. Everybody will have to, worry about their customers. Like for example, even there could be other things which will disrupt this. What we are talking about, that payment companies can't keep the customer information. Now, that could disrupt some of the existing models. So it just looks like nothing is static, and everything is moving. And to say that I will move with someone else may not be sufficient. You will have to move at your own pace. besides moving with someone else. So that's how I see it.
So we have partnerships, we have no, but you must build your own, and clearly, continuously, no free lunches. So you have to keep running hard, running fast, focus on the customer and what the customer wants. I want to come back to this question, this point that was made of the disruptor getting disrupted. And regulation is actually a very interesting disruptor also in this space. Because with a stroke of the pen, the regulator can either permit something or deny something that was already a business practice. We have already seen with the introduction of UPI, some of the, and now it seems funny to say this, but the legacy fintech or payment businesses, the legacy models of the wallet and so on, which was at one point the innovator, actually got quite severely disrupted. Right, the revenue and profit models, the bottom just dropped out of it because now everyone can interact and transact on UPI. So the P2P has become so much easier. Similarly, as more public digital infrastructure comes online, we can see that the so-called moats that have been created around businesses might actually very quickly get bridged. So here is a question for all of you.
And P2P, Anjali.
And P2P. P2P today, can UPI, you can already do P2P payment transaction. Less easy perhaps to do full-fledged lending with other
that
infrastructure.
Will also change. That will also get disrupted change. And that will change.
Yeah. But we need more infrastructure for that and perhaps more regulatory guardrails to protect the lender, if not the borrower. It seems today, and one hears this from various quarters, that fintechs are operating with more capital and less regulatory burden than the large banks, NBFCs, AMCs. So the responsible players who are well regulated carry both a burden of higher cost of capital and more regulatory overhead, if you will. So is it a level playing field? While we all know innovation needs flexibility, and I'm a big believer and investor in innovation. So of course, innovation needs flexibility and perhaps the sandboxes. Does it actually end up disadvantaging the traditional players? What do you make of it? And where do you see this actually going? Do you see fintechs getting regulated or everybody getting less regulated? Rajiv Sabharwal mentioned fintechs getting bank licenses, but while you can take deposits and reduce your cost of funds, but it also comes with its own set of RBI oversight. So where is this going in terms of more capital, less regulation for fintechs, higher cost of capital in some ways, and more regulation for the traditional players? Nilesh?
So this is like Anjali Joffrey boycott complaining about Sanat Jayasuriya's style of playing. Well, you are suitable for test match and not suitable for one day. Please leave the field. I don't think so. Banks or NBFCs or mutual funds or insurance companies have lesser capital. Probably they have lesser risk appetite. And this is a fight where, the David and Goliath, there is a level playing field. Goliath no longer enjoys the advantage because of its higher capital base. David, because of his risk appetite, is able to create disruption. So instead of complaining, we'll have no option but to collaborate. As Rajiv mentioned, we'll have to, change our techniques. Like Cheteshwar Pujara is going to move from test match to T20. We don't have a choice. The world is moving from test match to one day to T20, and we'll have to play according to those rules of the game.
Good point. Only Nilesh can take us from Zorro to cricket, and I'm waiting for what's next. But Vikram, over to you.
I don't think so. Vikram can hear you.
Can Vikram hear me? Okay, Rajiv, can we turn to you while Vikram comes online?
I thought you meant Rajiv Anand.
Either Rajiv's. And let me clarify, I did not mean less capital, but higher and lower cost of capital, which seems counterintuitive, but we must remember that fintechs are funded largely by VCs, who are largely funded by overseas pension funds and overseas sort of capital, non-Indian capital, where the cost of funds is a little bit lower right now. So, Rajiv, Anand, or Sabharwal, either one, please.
No, I'd like to hear Sabharwal go first, given the fact that he is is carrying the can for the fintechs, especially after having done wonderful work on technology in ICICI.
Mhm.
I would
So
uh,
see, I think my personal view is the regulator will always be concerned about the stability of the ecosystem. They don't want anybody to fail, any bank to fail ever, or they won't want any of the regulated entity to fail. So stability of the financial system is extremely important. So I think what will happen is that the fintechs will get more regulated compared to where they are today. If they want to be a bigger player in the ecosystem, then they will need to get more regulated. For example, you know that uh, um, NPCI has also said nobody should have more than 30% market share. Uh, so some of these things will come in. I think capital requirement for some of the fintechs may also become important. Who knows? They may need to share certain portion of the risk, like we have in the co-lending model. I think the fintechs may get more regulated as they become bigger and more relevant in the ecosystem. This does not mean they will not allow innovation to happen. I think I really admire RBI in the way they manage innovation and stability. Look at what happened to the P2P market. They allowed it to be there, and then when it became relevant, they brought in regulations. Look at the MFI market. They probably know just what is the right time to get the right regulations in. Uh, so to that extent, I just feel that they will allow innovation, but as some of these entities become bigger, they will get more regulated. I'm not very sure whether banks will have lesser regulations. I doubt that. Uh, because financial stability is extremely important. Though they in between they had experimented with special purpose banks like the payments banks or the small finance bank. And the thought was that we will get more of these types. But I think I'm not very sure whether that model has worked very well. It looks like most of the SFBs have also now are more like full-fledged banks, except for certain restrictions. So it is going to get more regulated for fintechs. That is what I believe. I don't know what you feel, Rajiv.
I think let's take the bank.
राजीव आपका वॉइस नहीं आ रहा योर वॉइस
As far as banks are concerned, we are going to see more, not less regulation. That whether it is from the regulator itself or from the market. If you look at Indian context, big 4 or 5 banks now have capital adequacy well in excess of 15%. Because in a sense, the markets have pushed the threshold for the best rated banks significantly higher, and so therefore, in a sense, the cost of doing business has increased. But if you want to demonstrate to your customers, to your investors, that you are a safe bank, then you have to maintain capital adequacy of 16-17%. So whether it's the market or whether it's the regulator, I think banks are going to continue to be more. For fintechs, yes, we've seen a great deal of work that's happened on the P2P side, but I think of any meaningful model, particularly on the lending side, which has scaled. And I think the regulation is very particular, especially of entities which are of a deposit taking nature. So, until until the regulators see, uh, the question to ask is, will fintech be able to innovate in such a manner that they are able to take deposits uh, outside the ambit of regulation is moot. Uh, but regulator would have in a sense, a softer touch, as long as they're not of deposit taking nature. Yes, I mean, on the lending side, they would, I completely agree with Rajiv that they have, side, they have led flourish up to a point with regulation. MFI is a good case in point. But I think to answer your question, the banks are going to see more, not less regulations. I also agree with Rajiv that in the context of that, the regulator is actually also pushing banks to innovate. And if you go with ideas, they're actually very, very open. Is whether RBI authority or as they or, yeah, far as fintech innovation is concerned, and I think it's very, very interesting in terms of what central banks are doing in innovation.
Mhm.
Both, not either or, both will continue. To the question that you're asking on will fintech will have capital but will have less regulation, that's the point I made, that as long as there is positive, there will be regulation.
Sure. So what we are hearing is regulation is providing the right kind of guidelines, guardrails, really balancing innovation and stability. Financial system stability continues to be very important. I do want to point out our next session is specifically on fintech. So to the audience and people who are attending today, a lot of the questions that I have seen on the Q&A sidebar will be addressed in that panel. So please stay and participate in that discussion as well. Here, I want to just close with a round of closing thoughts from everyone. What is next, do you think? Part of me thinks that the biggest neobanks will be the banks themselves. Right? As the big banks come up the technology curve and the digital curve, they have the customers, they have the data, they will either form partnerships or create it in-house. So the biggest neobank could be SBI, for example, with YONO. So what is the immediate future look like for each one of your organizations? And very quick, sort of 30 seconds, Vikram.
I would say I agree because at the end of the day, see, the debate boils down to the same thing: who owns the customer? Maybe we have new banking platform and other things, but at the end of the day, it's HDFC or SBI. Those are the guys who own the customers. Those are the guys basis which the customer has the trust of putting in their money or taking a loan. So I would say eventually what will happen, all these banks have to change, and that's what we have seen happening in America. I don't see any of the new banks or any of those new fintech companies becoming like a 200 billion or 300 billion company out there. So it's more about the banks will have to change. And I think with fintech evolution as well as COVID, I think it's just fast forward for the banks to try to get do this as soon as possible.
Great. Nilesh, if I may turn to you.
I think the model will be what Star TV and Hotstar showed. Star TV remained subscription-based revenue model. Hotstar became pure digital online, and both of them are coexisting with different characteristics, different culture, yet under the one ownership. So we'll have to create SBI, YONO, Star TV, Hotstar equivalent hybrid model.
Interesting. I'm going to come back to you, Nilesh, on that once we do one quick round. Rajiv, Anand.
Uh, uh, on the retail side, it's really more of the same in the sense of I think the to- 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 the speed of adoption will continue. We will go into tier 5, 6, 7 cities. We will have multi-language mobile apps, etc. You know, that journey, when said, it looks incremental, but as you look back 18, 24 months, then you suddenly see the amount of change that's actually happened. But to me, I think the big change now over the next, maybe 5 to 10 years is actually going to be on the SME and corporate banking.
Mhm.
Uh, if there's one space where technology is relatively unused and data is relatively unused. It's within the MSME and corporate banking space, and I think we're going to see huge change in terms of the way SME and corporate would happen.
So that's very interesting because we are seeing digitization of the SME business value chain. So it makes the SME as a business more visible, discoverable, and thus potentially underwritable and lendable. And just like we have had UPI emerge, there is also the Sahamati program that is being built out to be able to lend through direct pipes into SMEs to do flow-based lending and so on and so forth. So certainly product innovation is taking place. Digital models are being built for better risk assessment underwriting as well as for eventually detection and recovery as well. So big opportunity in SME. Also a segment of the economy that has been somewhat lower in the digital sector. And so whatever can be done to formalize and organize, bring them into the mainstream is probably good for that country too. Rajiv Sabharwal, please.
I quite agree with Nilesh that I think both will coexist, and it will not be geographically divided or anything, that it's India and it's Bharat. I think we will have customers on both sides who will use both models. So I believe that will happen. On SME, I do agree. In fact, just to give you a sense of numbers, we do a fair amount of channel finance business, and 60% of our channel finance is now done digitally. 60% of the customers, whether it's in terms of acquisition, whether it's in terms of credit evaluation, is all done digitally. So, a lot of this change will happen. But one thing which is certain, and I'm sure all will agree, is technology and people who are helping it reach to the front end will take center stage in all entities. They will be very, very critical on how both the models evolve, the brick and mortar as well as the digital.
Very true and interesting as well. So people who we thought were sort of middle office, which was neither front nor back, middle office becomes more important. So in large BFSI companies, the middle office itself is getting digitized.
Anjali, just one point I want to say here, because what great set of people here is one of the reasons. Also, I believe this is happening is because nobody has disrupted that space. Everybody still believes that only people with a technology background can provide us those things. Nobody has made it as simple that people like us who are on this panel can also code and can also deliver. So somebody has to disrupt this also. Maybe one of the startups will do it and will make it simple.
Rajiv, some of these things are actually underway. They may have not scaled enough to come to your attention, but
No, I know they are but subscale. They are all subscale.
Yeah, they're all subscale, but they will. And I think the way it is developing is they're not solving for the entire system. They are picking pieces of it. So Credgenics is solving for risk underwriting, collections.
Excellent. Yeah.
And as they bring that database together, then it becomes useful for actually going into core credit. We are seeing companies emerge with channel financing, where they're able to take slivers of that and solve for it. So certainly a lot of this is going on. Somebody's put up a question, and I've been told we have a few more minutes, so I'll keep going. Thoughts on e-rupee for better end-use management? The PM just launched e-rupee on the 15th. It's directed digital currency in some ways. Nilesh, would you have a view on e-rupee and how it could be used?
I think it's a great achievement. It's a purpose voucher given to intended beneficiary, removing the leakages, removing the intermediary. So what Aadhaar started, whereby government could direct benefits to intended recipients, and we could see disappearance of ghost ration cards, we could see disappearances of ghost fertilizer shops. Same way, e-rupee will go to a next level, where we will ensure that when we are sending benefits to a person, he is actually spending it for the right purpose and not the wrong purpose. Imagine giving money to a farmer for buying fertilizer and he using it to buy liquor. E-rupee will solve that problem also. So it's a great achievement, and it goes to demonstrate that digital infrastructure which India is creating on public side, I think that's far ahead of even developed nations. And I just want to say one thing. There was one colonial reporter who stayed in India for 3 years, couldn't find anything good in India. He was posted in France, and the first tweet he made that if I wanted to transfer money from one bank account to another bank account in India, it was instant through IMPS. The damn thing takes 3 days in France. So our public digital infrastructure is far, far superior, and e-rupee is maintaining that distance.
I could not agree more with you. And one spends a reasonable amount of time in another country, very developed Western country outside India, and the digital payment systems, the telecom systems are nowhere near our own. Let's not talk about telecom right now, but certainly the facility of instantaneous transaction and currency and digital sort of money transfer between individuals, leave alone between businesses and individuals or government and individuals. We are so far ahead. And I think one of the biggest innovations coming out of India is our UPI, India Stack, and the entire NPCI model, which itself is now getting disrupted, right, with account aggregators and the new umbrella entities. So since we do have a few more minutes, I'm going to ask for views on new umbrella entities. And will they be actually better for the customer or not necessarily, or better for the banks? Would anyone like to comment?
Yeah, let me go first. We really good years ago because of the RBI or intent really is to see whether by creating maybe more with the space. Not about competing against competing because the uh, private continues to be in cash. So for us, cash is the enemy, and I think anything any innovation that helps us bring down the cash that uh,
Okay, a series of questions, and maybe we can take them together. With large corporate B2B corporate loans be the forte of banks and fintechs drive B2C, will banks become the intermediaries to collect savings and then they lend to fintechs who on lend again eventually to B2C? And there's a point that was made on, do we believe some of the top private sector banks being reverse merged with fintech? I think we are not seeing the top private sector banks necessarily. We are seeing fintech starting to apply for bank licenses, some of them getting them, and taking over some of the more stressed banks for sure. I think it's an interesting question, and I do want to put this out. Do you see your organizations acquiring large fintechs?
uh, fair to say that this is not a conversation that certainly a conversation that gets thrown around from time to time in boardrooms. But I think obviously you look at the sector, most of the large private sector banks and some of these entities that one is talking about, either the large ones are too large, the revenue bank value are being valued at are whatever two. Uh, would make sense. Yes, would you on acquisition of relative size? Yes, sir.
Right. So acquisitions, so partnerships, acquisitions, best of breed. There's a point that was made, biggest banks would be the FANG types tech companies and not SBI YONO type in the next 10 years. What is the belief of the panel?
I wholeheartedly.
Rajiv Anand agrees. Nilesh?
So I really don't know how the future will be. If we go by 2000 experience, AOL Time Warner didn't create a successful company. It was an epic failure. So it's possible for a physical company to get converted into digital. It's possible for a digital company to fail. It's possible for physical plus digital company to create a hybrid model. I think what will succeed is the basics of business, where you are focused on governance, you are focused on return ratios, and you are focused on capital allocation.
The only difference I would say is you have to think of whether return ratios matter in today's market. All other two ratios, I agree with you completely.
Yes. So I also have that self-doubt, Rajiv.
No, it's very
So
difficult,
good.
Anjali, to predict.
So FANG type or SBI YONO types?
No. There, I think the FANG types are more likely. But in today's world, while it is good to make prediction for 10 years. I think we should all make predictions next 2 years and keep doing it regularly because the way disruption is happening, by the larger companies may not get disrupted quickly because they're pretty large, but for smaller companies, and it's relevant for bigger also, that you have to keep changing every 2 years. There's no other option.
Yeah, that I
As
completely
they say, only the paranoid survive.
Yes.
that I completely agree, Anjali, because ultimately financial services are only users, meaning the large tech companies are creating the technology and fintechs are creating use cases around that. Two is customer expectations are changing very, very rapidly. And so therefore trying to have a 5 and 10 year view to my mind is very, very dangerous. I think you've got to play this in get so that I agree.
So thank you all very much. This has been a very, very interesting discussion. I think all of you have been so insightful and so candid. That really appreciate that. Key takeaways, all of this is good for the customer. Service will improve. There will be more innovation on product. There'll be less cost to the customer as well. Somewhere technology will create efficiencies to provide for lower margins and so on for businesses and for BFSI companies. Ultimately, it's partnerships, it's embracing technology, it's embracing digitization, balancing innovation and stability through prudent regulation, which we are fortunate to have a regulator who is able to do that. Business leaders have to be like Zorro, with or without the mask, ride the horses, make it work.
With the mask in today's time.
With the mask. Sure. So be Zorro with the mask, ride the two horses. War for talent, severe war for talent, both on technology as well as business. We may start seeing some convergence of fintechs coming into banking through licenses and so on. And on the other hand, larger companies, larger BFSI institutions embracing technology and sort of turning into fintechs themselves. And finally, it is don't think about the next 10 years, really act for the next 2. 80% of strategy is actually in execution of it. So focus on that. So I'll summarize and close with that. Thank you all so very much. And I'm going to turn this over to
Thank
Sandeep
you.
Khosla, the DG.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjali.